what I would like to do for you tonight is a kind of an abbreviated, almost a full program that I would do for a school group. And this is one of my most favorite, not only my favorite, but it's one of the most popular asked for programs with teachers across the state of Michigan. This virtual program on invasive species, mainly dealing with aquatic invasive species and mainly dealing with the sea lamprey. And so this is a program that I do a lot of these for school programs throughout the state of Michigan. I told Patrick when he was asking me, I said, what would you want to do? And I said, well, maybe I should try the aquatic species program because it seems to be very popular with schools. So I want to do that for you tonight. Now, I do want to say that I see Jim, my friend Jim Clark. Jim, I tried to take the information that I got from Steve and plug it into my PowerPoint, but it would not let me do it. And I was all excited because you had some great information, graphics in there. And I apologize. I really wish it was here because I really want to introduce what you folks have done for the Hamlin Preservation Society. So I apologize. It's not part of the program tonight, even though I wish it was. So, introduction slide. Oops, I better go to the right screen here so I can see what I'm looking at. And come on, there we go. So I've already given the introduction. We'll talk about the sea lamprey, a lot about the sea lamprey. I actually have one more live sea lamprey in the aquarium. I've got down to one. Now, I want to let you know, sea lamprey, when I get a live sea lamprey, I usually get them into June, first part of June, into May sometimes. And that's when they're spawning up the rivers. They're spawning when the rivers are cold. We'll talk more about that. And they catch them in cages. Most of the ones I have come from either the Sabo River or somewhere off of Lake Huron. And then I go get these live sea aquariums. And then sea lamprey. And I put them in the aquarium at the beach house for the summertime so people can see them. And then in the fall, I start using them for school programs in the winter. And if I'm lucky, and most years I'm pretty lucky at this, I can get my sea lamprey to last from May of last year all the way through to February or March of the following year. Now, that's extraordinary because these sea lamprey are on their last legs. They can't eat. We're going to talk about that. They can't eat. They haven't eaten anything. They haven't been in the Great Lake, out in the deep water of the Great Lake eating for almost a year now, pretty close to a year. So all that energy that they've used to stay alive all the way till now. So my lamprey, I got one more left, and I'll pull it out of the aquarium and hold it up for you. I think that's the highlight of the program anyway. So we'll talk about that. So when we talk about invasive species, there's a lot of information about invasive species. How do invasive species get here? What's happening on our planet Earth to cause these invasive species to spread, not only into North America, our continent, but also to other continents. There's several examples of insects and plants from our continent that are native here that have been put over one reason or another in other continents, and it's causing a big problem. It's upsetting the balance of nature. It takes nature thousands of years to get this balance. So here's a kind of a graph that shows all kinds of different things that we're finding out about invasive species, why they're spreading so fast across the world, and a lot of it, some of climate change and transportation. You know, we want to feed the world. So when we feed the world, we're also moving things around with pallets and all kinds of stuff. And so that's a real quick, shows you a little bit about invasive species. And like I said, there's intentional and unintentional. You know, the European mice, you know, most of our heritage comes from either Europe or Asia. And when these people left on sailing ships to come here to this new continent, they brought things with them that, because they're not going to be able to go home like today. You know, you can get on a plane in 6 hours, you can be in Europe. Okay, well, they can't do that. They couldn't do that back then. They were on sailing ships that take weeks to cross the Atlantic or the Pacific. So they brought things with them, plants, things that they were used to having back in their homeland, and they wanted to have them here. And they didn't do it intentionally, but they brought these things here. So that's kind of what this shows. Now, we know there are some times when people intentionally bring things here, okay? Like we know that ballast water in ships, we've known that for decades, that ballast water in ships a lot of times bring invasive species. We haven't done a whole lot to regulate it, stop it. Yeah, there's some, but not a whole lot. So there's some intentional too. And what it does is it upsets our whole balance that nature has been worked on for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. This balance has been upset because we've introduced something. Yeah, I tell kids, I said, it's like someone coming into your house, a stranger coming into your house while you're gone, eating up all your food. Okay, it's upset your balance of your house, your food and everything. So it's the same thing that you would see in this case with the fish. Okay, and we could use the same thing for any invasive. It could be a plant invasive doing the same thing. It upsets that balance, and it takes nature a long time to get over it. And here's some examples. We got the zebra mussel, quagga mussels. We got the gobies now. We got the Eurasian waterfoil. We got the spiny flea. These are things that have got here one way or another. Either people brought them here intentionally or unintentionally. So, and I when I went to a conference 2 weeks ago, I had a fisheries biologist I was talking to for the longest time, and we were talking about the quagga mussels. And I said, what's the update on that? And he was telling me, and I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Nature, we're trying to get that balance, helping nature get that balance. And with the quagga mussels, we're kind of starting to see that happening. It's not happening real fast, but it is happening. So there is hope for us, but if we could limit, not introduce something else afterwards to cause a problem. So I'm going to skip this video here and hang on. There we go. Okay, so that video is for the kids. It's really a kind of a really good video for young children, second, third, fourth graders. So I just skipped it because I want to talk more about the stuff I have here around me. So the sea lamprey, the adult sea lamprey in the adult stage of its life is a true vampire fish when it comes to feeding. Okay, it needs blood. It needs a blood meal. I told kids that you're going to put a hook on a fishing pole and cast it in and catch a sea lamprey. Okay, they're not going to go after the worm. All right, that you might catch a fish like a salmon or a lake trout on a boat out in the lake, big lake, and it might have a marking or it might have a sea lamprey, but you're not going to catch the sea lamprey itself. As an adult, it is a fish that needs a blood meal. Okay, it's a very old fish too, a primitive fish too, and you can see the graphic there how it does that, and we'll talk more about it. Now, there's two things in this slide here. It shows their natural. You might say where they're naturally found in our continent of North America or the United States. And that's that light brown area along the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, since this was published, they've actually now taken away the little spot in the Gulf of Mexico. They're not finding any sea lamprey there anymore. And they're not finding sea lamprey now in Georgia and even South Carolina. So as the oceans are warming up and changing, they're finding that the sea lamprey range is now moving northward, even more northward. The red area, of course, is where they're invasive, where they should not be, but they're invasive. And that connection of the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean, that's that right there, that how they get in. And the other graphic here shows the Lake Superior up here, the stair step effect of the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and then you got Lake Erie, and then you got Lake Ontario, and then you got the Atlantic Ocean. So there's two steps. And sea lamprey are very poor jumpers. I tell the school kids this too, that if you're going to have a fish basketball team, you don't want a sea lamprey on your basketball team because your fish basketball team, because they can't jump. They can jump, but they can only jump a little bit. They can't jump they're not like the salmon that can really jump and move up over waterfalls and stuff, smaller waterfalls and rapids. Sea lamprey, now they have a hard time getting over anything. So they were always there was always this barrier, the rapids of the St. Lawrence River. The rapids was an initial barrier, and then we able to build canals like the Erie Canal was a way for the sea lamprey to get into Lake Ontario and even parts of Lake Erie. And then we go and we build more canals and lock systems to get around Niagara Falls. And that allows the sea lamprey to come in. These little guys, they're like, well, I'll follow the ship in, and the ship can get around, I can go around. And that's what they did. And so that's how they got into the Great Lakes and spread rapidly through the Great Lakes. And here's a photo of the Welland Canal and showing a ship coming. I would think it's probably, I can't tell if it's coming or going here, but it's one of the ships coming through the Welland Canal to get around Niagara Falls, that natural barrier. Now, this is a really important slide on my PowerPoint because this shows the life cycle. And I think it's unique because the sea lamprey is only a parasitic fish when it's an adult, and that's only for 12 to 18 months. So a year to a year and a half, that's it. That's the only time in their life they want blood. But a sea lamprey lifespan is about 10 to 12 years. 10 to 12 years. So only that last year and a half is when it does the damage that you and I know about. It's that time there. So real quickly looking at this, we see the adult, or they call it the parasitic juvenile. I like to call it the adult because to me that's the adult stage too. But that's when they're in the deep, cold waters of the Great Lakes. They're not in the rivers and they're not in the inland lakes. The sea lamprey are only in the deep, cold waters of the Great Lakes. Why? They're a cold water species of fish. They're from the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, halfway around the world. So I grab my globe here of the world. There's North America right there. So there's North America, but we go all the way to the other side and we get over here to the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea over here. Okay, that's where they're native to. That's where they have natural predators, but not here in North America. Okay, so did I say that sea lamprey are from the Caspian and Black Sea? I apologize. It's the zebra mussels and quagga mussels. Okay, I just flunked that grade. Okay, I just flunked. Okay, don't hold that against me. The sea lamprey are from the oceans, the cold water oceans. That's what I meant to say. I got my brain. I've had a tough day. I've already told Patrick this. I've had a tough day today with the snow and breaking down and the accent there. Everything's gone. So I made another mistake today. But the sea lamprey like the cold areas of the earth, the cold water, ocean waters, the cold ocean waters. So if you go to the Caribbean on a cruise, you're not going to find sea lamprey, the sea lamprey. They do not like warm water as an adult. As an adult, they do not like the warm water. So they're from the cold water oceans there. And so they got to live in cold, deep, dark waters as an adult. And the Great Lakes are perfect for that. Okay. They're absolutely perfect. So now so during this time, they're getting blood from big fish. They're not out there. There's no little bass or a little bluegill out there that they're drawing the blood from, the sea lamprey. They're getting it from the lake trout, the salmon, the whitefish, the big fish in the Great Lakes that also live at the bottom in the deep cold waters of the Great Lakes. Okay, so that's what they're doing. And one sea lamprey consumes about 40 pounds of blood as an adult. One sea lamprey. Okay, now think about it. If you catch a salmon that's 18, 20, if you catch a 20-pound salmon, you got it. Wow, you got to take a picture and show all your friends that, okay? So one sea lamprey consumes in its lifetime, that short period of time, about 40 pounds of blood. So you could see what happens if too many sea lampreys are out there and they all have to eat and they all finding this fish, maybe 3 or 4 are finding the same fish and hanging on and they're drawing blood from that fish. Well, just think, if you had something draining your blood, several things on you draining your blood, you're going to get weak, you're going to get tired, and you're going to faint. Okay. And then you're going to go into shock and likely die without the, all that blood in you. So same thing. Now the sea lamprey, when it's in the adult stage, near the end of the adult stage life, the sea lamprey goes into a spawning stage. This is the stage where the sea lamprey really, really changes. Okay. And this is my fake sea lamprey. It's about the right size for the Great Lakes. You can see it here. Yeah, it's losing a little bit of paint here and there. But the sea lamprey, okay, actually its digestive system, both male and female digestive system at the end of its adult stage shrivels up, just totally shrivels up. No longer can it eat. No longer can eat blood meal anymore because its digestive system, the stomach, the intestines have all shriveled up. The reason for that is because this thin little sea lamprey has to have room for, the female needs room for the eggs and the male needs room for the sperm. So they fill that cavity up. The female does with eggs and the male with sperm. And so they don't have a stomach or the digestive system anymore to eat. And this is called the spawning stage, Now that means they're going to die, okay? Because their stomach's not going to just regrow itself after they reproduce. No, it doesn't happen that way. Very similar to a salmon, you might say. The same thing with salmon when they spawn. It's the end of their life, no matter what. It's going to be the end of their life because their stomach and digestive system is gone. So the difference between a sea lamprey in the spawning stage and a salmon in the spawning stage is the sea lamprey is a cold water species. They need cold water. Okay. When do the salmon spawn? They come up in the fall, right? Well, what are the rivers? The rivers in the fall are still running fairly warm in the fall. They've had all summer. The lakes and the streams have warmed up. That water coming down the river is warm in the fall of the year. So the last thing the sea lamprey wants to do is come into warm water in its adult stage. So what they do is they wait till the rivers are the coldest they can be. And think about it. You got November, December, January, and February for that water to cool down and form ice on it. Okay. Now the water's really cold. And so even after February, March, April, the water coming down the river is very, very, very cold yet from the past winter. So that's when the sea lamprey comes out of the deep. The spawning sea lamprey comes out of the deep, dark waters of the Great Lakes and goes up the rivers to spawn. Okay. So people will say, well, gee, why don't we see them? Well, how many of us are out here staring in the river at this time of the year on a cold day like today, looking for a sea lamprey? Nobody is. Okay. So you don't see them, but they're out there trying to go up the rivers to spawn. Okay. Now, what they do is the female goes first. She always goes first. Okay. She has to go first because she's doing something very important. She's laying behind her a trail of pheromones, perfume. I like to tell kids it's like perfume, the pheromone is. And she goes up the river, and right behind her, not far behind her, some males, and they're following, sniffing, and they're just going up too. Now she gets far enough up the river where the river is very shallow. The river is cold and shallow, and it's sandy bottom or gravel bottom. And she actually makes a nest by moving the little rocks or the sand, and then she deposits all of her eggs. How many eggs? Well, let's take a look at this. Now, let me get that jar around here. You can see this jar. There's the little dots in that jar. There's over 1,000 little eggs in this jar, sea lamprey eggs. They came from one female. So you can see why she loses her digestive system. She needs to put all these things inside her. So she has over 1,000 eggs in here. And she deposits those eggs. And then she covers them back up. And she swims away and up and dies. No living, no going back to the big lake. She up and dies. The males that were following her follow her to that point, and then they deposit the sperm in that area, and they, of course, mess it with their tail, so it gets mixed in. All that gets mixed in, and then they go off and die. So that's the spawning stage. That's the spawning stage. The adults die off, and then the eggs are left behind, the fertilized eggs. And that's what I have in my aquarium. In just a minute, couple minutes, I'm going to show you one of the spawning sea lamprey. Now, we're not done yet. We got to talk about the next stage, which is the larva stage, the number 2 stage here on the thing, the larva stage. And that, if you look closely, it says 3 to 10 years plus. Most of the life of a sea lamprey is spent in the larva stage. And I just happen to have some ones here. These aren't alive, but there's a whole bunch of them in here. So, and as you can see, you can use my finger to kind of get yourself an idea of the size. Some are smaller than my finger, some are bigger. But the larva stage, at this stage of their life, they are not drinking blood. Okay, they're not parasitic. They don't have teeth yet. If you've noticed some of the slides with the teeth, well, at this stage of their life, larva stage, they have no teeth. There's no teeth in there. They have a sucking mouth part, but no teeth. And so what do they eat? What do they eat? And the graph shows down a good one. It shows them in the sand like this. They're just in the sand like this. And water goes in their mouth, through their body, and out. And any particles of food in the water go in their body, get taken out, and expels the clean water. So they are eating little particles of food. They're filter feeders for the larvae. And they're that way from, like I said, 3 to 10 plus years of their life. They're filter feeders. And I always tell people, so if you're on a canoe trip in the summer and you're canoeing down one of the rivers in Michigan and you stop and you get out and you put your foot down in this and you see all these things really swimming around your foot real quick, you're probably going to go, and you think they're all leeches. You think they're leeches. They're not leeches. Okay. They're not going to attach to you and start sucking your blood out. They can't. Okay. They're not leeches. You just disturb their home and they're just going crazy because their home has been disturbed. Once you leave, they'll settle back down. Okay. So what's cool about this is they're living in year round for 3 to 10 years. They live year round in rivers and streams, shallow rivers and streams. So the water gets warm in the summer, doesn't hurt them at all. Okay. Gets cold in the winter, doesn't hurt them at all. At this stage of their life, they are very adaptable. Okay. Unlike what's going to happen when they become adults. They become unadaptable, kind of like humans in some ways, right? Yeah, adaptable more when we're young than we are old. Yeah, but anyway, that's the way it is. And then they go through a change of life. Okay, their change of life is mainly, it's hard to tell from this jar. This jar is not the best, but they actually start to grow teeth, and their sucking mouth part becomes really, really strong, and they get teeth. And then you get this urge for food in the form of blood. And they also get another thing happens to them. They start hating warm water. I don't like this warm water. And there's no blood meal here. So what they do is they swim with the current down the rivers, down the streams, till they get to the big Great Lake and go deep down. And down there they find a buffet of salmon and lake trout swimming around. They attach to the side and they use those teeth to grind away the scales, and the fish actually bleed just like you and I would. If you scratch long enough, you scratch your skin off, you're going to start bleeding. Well, they're going to do the same thing to the fish. Their teeth are grinding away at the fish till the fish bleeds, and then they start sucking the blood out. Okay. Now, they're not going to suck 40 pounds of blood out of a fish right away. They're going to fill their stomach up, let go off, and just relax. And then they'll come back later when they're hungry and they'll get another fish. That's how their lifestyle. So that gets us into the adult stage. So I know this was a long drawn out part of the program, but it's very important to understand, because now that we know how the sea lamprey lives, the life stage, now we have a better idea. Fish biologists have a good idea. How do we control these things? Because they're devastating our native fish in the Great Lakes. Okay, the lake trout and the whitefish are devastated because of the enormous number of sea lamprey that were in the Great Lakes. So now we know how to control them. Yes, we aren't going to go out in Lake Michigan and dump all this poison in the lake and try to control them, because that won't work, because it will dilute itself. It'll never reach the bottom in time, and it'll probably kill some other things we don't want to kill, native things. So now, how do we do it? So we're going to go. I'm going to skip this one right here. We're going to go right here. So how are we going to control them? First of all, we can catch them when they're spawning. This time of year right now, they're putting traps out on some of the rivers and streams, and they're catching sea lamprey, live sea lamprey in the traps. And some of them get killed, but a lot of them are taken and used for research study. We could put dams in the spring on some of the rivers, smaller rivers, shallow rivers. We put dams. Remember, they're not good jumpers. They can't jump very high. As you can see, the dam isn't very big. It's just a screen to let the water through, but they can't get over it. Okay. And then there's other natural things like the ones at Tequamanon River, where the waterfall is actually enough to stop them coming up further up in the Tequamanon River. The other way to control them, and this is the most successful way, is to use a chemical called lampricide. Now, let me tell you, the researchers are really, really working hard, trying not to use a chemical in the future to control the sea lamprey. But right now, there has been nothing as effective as lampricide. We have brought the numbers of sea lamprey down from the 1960s. We've brought them down almost 90%. There's 90% less sea lamprey in the Great Lakes now, thanks to lampricide. And thanks to researchers and people that know how to use this chemical. It's not something you and I would have. It's not something you buy at the store and you just go out and bloop, 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 bloop in the river near you, or the stream near you. No, because it would be very harmful for natural things too. As you can see in this photo, the people that use the lampricide are scientists, the researchers, and they know what they're doing. They do accurate studies. They find exactly where the sea lamprey are in the stream and rivers, and they only treat a little bit of area. Okay, they're not out there just dumping this thing in the water to kill everything in the world out there. They just want to kill the sea lamprey at the larva stage when they're filter feeders. Let's get them when they're filter feeders. We got 3 to 10 plus years to do it. Okay, so that's the most effective way, and it's been Canada, the United States, both of us do that. Now, I will show you this video real quick. I won't show all of it to you, just a little bit. Can you hear it and see it? Hopefully everybody can hear it and see it.
We can see it, Alan, but I'm not sure there is any sound.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. What's happening here is he's showing the sea lamprey, what it does, the effect, and they're talking about the 1950s and 60s when the sea lamprey became a real problem, noticeable problem in the 1950s and 60s, and they're showing old footage of that time. And now they're showing how the Great Lakes and Canada, United States jointly go together to control the sea lamprey. We work hands to hands, research. We coordinate everything. They have for decades now. They've been doing this. This is showing how sea lamprey is administrated in a very small portion, in very small parts of the river, only where the sea lamprey larvae are. And so that's what they're talking about here, how they control the sea lamprey. So I'm going to, and they treat the rivers and streams. They're not pouring this in the Great Lakes. So I'm gonna go to the next slide here, which we're getting closer to the end of it here. This is something I get asked a lot. Oh, you know what? Before we go here, I promised you, I almost forgot. I got to put on my white glove, just like the old commercials. Huh? White glove test. Here's my white glove, nice and clean white glove. I have to wear a glove because sea lampreys are the slimiest animal that I've ever touched, and even the researchers have to have a glove on to hold on to them, because you try to grab them with your bare hand and it's like they fly up. They just, that slimy stuff on them won't hurt you. It just makes them so hard to hang on to. But a glove helps a lot, a cotton glove here. So I got my cotton glove on. I better roll up my sleeve a little bit here. Pull the top here. Okay, guys. Now the water in here, my aquarium, the water in my aquarium is 40 degrees. You don't like this. Okay, let go. He's got my temperature gauge. Let go. All right, let's do this again. He's being got it. There we go. Woohoo! Now I got to be careful. I can't put them over my computer, but I can get them close enough. Hopefully you can see the mouth part. He's sticking to this piece of plexiglass I have here. Makes a good display. You can actually see him sucking onto it. And there's rows of teeth. Let's see how close I can get that without getting that over my computer. Oh, he moved off it. See, he's not trying to draw blood from me. He just he's a fish out of water. Here we go. That's even better. In the middle there is his tongue. His tongue actually has teeth on it. That's so after he rasps enough with it on the side of a fish, get the scales off, he can poke a hole in it and start sucking the blood. He does have 2 eyes, 1 on each side, and the eyes are pretty big. Let me get it up here. If you can see that. He's making sounds. He's like a squishy thing. He does have gills on the side, and they're just round holes on each side. You see the gills over there, the gills. He's a primitive fish. In ancestors, what we mean by that, the ancestors, we find fossilized sea lamprey that go all the way back to the dinosaur age. So we know that it existed during the dinosaur age, the sea lamprey. It doesn't have any bones in it. There's no bones in the sea lamprey, no bones in it. It's all the same thing that you have at the end of your nose I can't think of it right now, but it's not a bone. It's and that's all it is. So it's a primitive. It doesn't have a bladder, an air bladder, like most of our fish today that you and I think of have air bladders. And the thing with an air bladder allows the fish to seek its level in the column of water. Okay, it might be there's more food up here in the column of water than down here. The sea lamprey doesn't have an air bladder, so when the sea lamprey stops swimming, it sinks to the bottom. And then when it wants to get up to the top, it has to swim up to the top and keep swimming, and then it will stop swimming and it sinks to the bottom. So they use a lot of energy getting around because they don't have that air bladder like the more modern fish, the bluegills and perch and all that have air bladders. So it's pretty cool here, as you can see them. Oop, I almost got a drop in the computer. But some people think they're snakes, but they're not a snake. Oh, he's sliding out of my hand. He's sliding out of my hand. Slid on the floor. All right, guy. He didn't like that. I apologize. I'm going to put him back in the water. He's not very happy with me. Let's put this on top. The sea lamprey have been noted to jump out of my aquarium, so I have to put a rock on the top. So the sea lamprey is a pretty cool fish, but it's an invasive that harms our native fish. Our native fish. All right, so I got a little water. Fortunately, none of it got on my inside the keys of my computer. So on this slide here, the most common question I get asked by people, adults and kids, is adults and kids. They ask me, "Can you eat sea lamprey?" And the answer is, sure you can, but not many people do. But in some countries, they do eat sea lamprey where they're native. Remember I said the cold Atlantic North? The cold Atlantic North Ocean? Well, up here, you got Norway, the Scandinavian countries, you got Britain, England, Ireland. That's the cold part of the Atlantic Ocean, and that's where they're native to. And when they get sea lamprey up there, they actually save it and they cook it up and they eat it. Now, one of the most famous people, now that she's passed, it's not going to happen anymore, but one of the most famous persons that ate sea lamprey every year for her birthday was Queen Elizabeth. They actually make sea lamprey pie for her, and it's a royalty. It is a royalty food, sea lamprey. Now, my friends, like the gentleman here holding a sea lamprey, asking them if they've eaten sea lamprey, and if they have, how do they like it? They all say no. They've eaten sea lamprey, but they all say it tastes awful. It's rubbery. It doesn't have a good taste to it. I guess it's an acquired thing to get. So they cooked it, they baked it, they've done everything they could think. They even deep fried, and they said it still doesn't taste good. So they don't know why over in those countries for thousands of years. They've been eating sea lamprey. Now, why is it so royalty? Because sea lamprey can't be caught with a fishing pole, okay, unless you catch a fish that's attached to, okay? That's the only way. So netting, when they're netting fish, occasionally they get a sea lamprey. They save it aside because it's still popular today in royalty in those countries to eat sea lamprey. But I don't think you and I are going to see it on our menu here in the future. Other native lamprey? Yes, there are. And the good people at the research station, the Sea Lamprey station, made me these little jars of native lamprey. Now, they're not sea lamprey. This is a northern brook lamprey. Now, if you've ever been fishing, in all my life, only once have I caught a bass, a largemouth bass once, and it had a lamprey on it. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's a sea lamprey. Well, then I found out later it's not. It was caught in a lake, in the inland lake in Michigan. And we do have lamprey, but look how small it is. Okay, I'll get my full-size one here. Okay, this is a full-size one, and this is a little one here. They don't get any bigger than this. And they're not sea lamprey, they're native freshwater lamprey. And there's a bunch of them. There's a chestnut lamprey, it's a little bit bigger. The chestnut lamprey, you can see them on the finger size. And then there's a silver lamprey, an American brook lamprey. And these are smaller lamprey. They're freshwater. And the thing is, there's natural controls. The muskies, the pike will eat them. And when those are smaller, you got the bass will eat them. And occasionally, when they get to an adult, they occasionally will attach to one of our native fish, because they're native fish too, and take a little blood out. But they're not a big deal. They're very kind of rare to see. And things that you can do to help, probably these are all common ones, but probably the one that is the biggest, and talking to the fishery biologist and the people at the research station where they do the sea lamprey research, the biggest one is the last one, to support the governments, in this case Canada and the United States, in controlling the sea lamprey. Okay, there's been some issues in the previous years, presidential years, that they talked about eliminating all that funding, the U.S. funding. There's been talk, if political winds blow right in Canada, they talk to maybe eliminate. If that would be devastating, because we've spent, since the 1960s, we've spent all this energy and time to lower that down, that number of sea lamprey in the Great Lakes. And we have a $9 billion yearly business in the state of Michigan in fishing alone. Okay, that's charter boats, that's people going to motels, that's people going to restaurants, people buying things in our towns. And it's all this is $9 billion. And if we're afraid, if the government bodies stop supporting this and putting money to keep the numbers down, and they get out of control, then why would anyone want to come to Michigan and get a charter boat when you're not going to get anything, or it's going to be very rare to get anything, because the lamprey have devastated like they did in the 1950s and 60s. We don't want to go back to that. So that's probably the biggest one of all those right there. And I think that will be it. If you have any questions, and again, I want to apologize to Jim Clark about not being able to put that on here, because I was all excited about talking about that today. I thought, oh, that's going to be cool to talk about and show you, because I found it fascinating. So maybe that's another talk for another time. So,
Alan, do you want to elaborate, or do you want to elaborate, or Jim, do you want to unmute and share in terms of what Alan's referring to regarding the folks at that we collaborate with in terms of the Hamlin Lake Preservation Society?
I would like Jim to do that, because Jim he has all the knowledge of it. So Jim, go ahead.
He's trying to get unmuted, I think. I tried to request that he unmute.
Yourself.
Well, everybody's muted, so I'm.
He's still muted, Jim.
How about
There you go.
There you go.
We of course have are very interested in Hamlin Lake Preservation Society, and we hired Progressive AE to do some studies, and so they are in the middle of completing their last summer's study, and that's what Alan is talking about. I don't have any skills to give you the results, but they've mapped like weeds mostly, the starry wort and milfoil in Hamlin Lake. And I don't think Hamlin Lake Preservation Society is going to treat any of those with chemicals, but we know they're there.
Yeah, I think what you don't want is some of the lakes around Detroit. I've read many stories of some of the lakes north of Detroit, up around Pontiac, have a really problem with invasive plants. And it's ruining their beaches, it's ruining their fishing. And we just don't want to see that up here. And they're spending thousands of dollars every year just to try to do some control on those lakes. And boy, that'd be awful if we had something like that happen here too. So it's good to get ahead of the game.
Alan, what rivers would be the closest to the state park that you know are treated for lamprey?
That's a great question. I was just talking at the Lantern Lit. One of the gentlemen and his wife and child was at there, and he actually works at the lamprey control station here in Ludington. There's 5 lamprey control stations on the Great Lakes. On all of the Great Lakes combined, there's 5 lamprey control stations. Ludington is one of those control stations. It's out near out in the industrial park. Their setup is there, but they treat in the summertime, in the warmer months of the year, early spring or late spring through early fall, they treat rivers for the larvae. And what they do is those 5 stations divide up the Great Lakes. They have divided up the Great Lakes. So the tributaries, the rivers that flow in a certain area are taken care of by this station, one station, another one. So they're not crossing paths all the time. And so what they do is they go out for several days. And when it's retired people, it could be anybody, educators. It's also college kids, people that aren't in college that have an interest. These group of people are trained ahead of time. They're actually going to be training them right about now. They start the training in this time of year, March, and they'll train them. And so when May hits, they're out there. They go out for several days in a caravan of vehicles with equipment and the lampricide. And what they do is let's say this year they're going to do, I'm just saying, I'm not saying they're going to do this year. I didn't ask about rivers this year, but it could be the Piermark, or it could be the Pentwater River, the Pierre Marquette River. It could be the Lincoln River. See, they wouldn't do the Sable River, Big Sable here, because we have the dam so close. They don't need to do that. But then they go up to the Manistee River. So they might do 5, 6, 7 rivers in one year, in one summer. Okay, they extensively go through the watershed of the river, and they find where these lamprey larvae are. That's a lot of walking, a lot of through the woods, mosquito bites, everything. And they do all this in the summer, and then they treat. When they find these areas, then they set up their equipment and they specialize treat these areas. Okay, and they monitor these areas. And so they'll do the 5, 7 rivers this year, and then next year it might be the Benzie River, the rivers north of that, the next 5 rivers north of that. They'll treat those rivers, and then the following year after that they'll treat rivers above that. So they have this cycle. So not every river gets treated every year. It's a cycle. they don't have to treat them every year. The larva lives 3 to 10 plus years, so they don't have to cycle every year into the river. They do this cycle through, and that might be come back in 5 years or 6 years from now and do the rivers that I told you at the beginning. So it's a complete cycle.
So what agency is out at the industrial park that he works for?
Yeah, it's United States Fisheries and Wildlife Service. United States Fisheries and Wildlife Service, along with USGS, United States Geological Survey, because they're the research body of the federal government. They do a lot of research. And so those two agencies are working together. Now, as you get closer to Canada, then Environmental Canada also works with a group there too. Yeah, it's not the DNR, the Michigan DNR, that's all federal government programs.
Okay. We have a hand raised and I'm trying to, okay, you're unmuted, I believe.
Okay, my name is Barry Matthews.
Oh, I know who you are.
Remember me?
He's the one that introduced me to Sea Lamprey. He really was. When I first started working here, he came and he did this wonderful Sea Lamprey program, and I loved it. And I learned, my beginning learning of Sea Lamprey was through you.
I just thought I'd sit in on this one when I saw it.
Yeah. Did I say anything wrong? I hope I did.
Nothing radically wrong. I was hoping you'd come up with some of the new things, because I haven't been out to the office now for a number of years. So I gotta get back out there and see what's new in the system.
Right. But Barry knows how the system works when the rotation with the streams and rivers a lot better than I do, because that was his job.
Yeah, about 35 years of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you. It was a good program.
Oh, you're welcome, Barry. Good to see you.
So Sea Lamprey management, based on the 90% threshold, and maybe this is a question for Barry as well, from a invasive species, is it viewed therefore as being managed in terms of, I personally don't hear that much about it anymore, as when I was growing up as a kid and so forth, it seemed to be much more prevalent. Numbers have come down, but is it looked at as we're maintaining it and we need to keep steady funding to ensure it, but that as an invasive species, it's in fact managed?
I would say yes, it is. I don't have any new data for about 10 years, but at the time I retired, we considered it managed, but that was it. It was not something you could stop doing and then go back into it later, because the lamprey population would explode in about 3 years.
Yeah, and that's politically, I've been hearing, I know in Canada, they've been having this discussion, and there's been talk too here politically that maybe it's one of those programs that we don't need to fund anymore. And I think that's sad, because I think we've done such a good job controlling them. Now it's not on the radar. Like you said, Patrick, it's not on the radar anymore. So why do we need to fund this anymore? That's the attitude. And not realizing we got to educate people. If we stop funding this, we just let this go. It's like Barry said, we're gonna face problems, and the fishermen are gonna come unglued, and the restaurant owner and the hotel, that people don't want to come here and fish anymore. So
Canada and the United States, I believe their total budget between the two of them is about $25 million now.
Right.
$25 million gets you $9 billion.
Right. Yeah.
A good return. Are there any other questions this evening for Alan in terms of this topic?
I only made one big mistake, but I caught myself.
Yes, you did.
And I started talking about quagga mussels and zebra mussels. I go, whoa, what am I doing? They're not from the Black Sea. I mean, they're from the Black Sea, but not the sea lamprey. That's a whole program in itself.
I have a question. Do they use weirs on any of the local rivers here to trap the adults coming up to spawn?
I do programs when they take eggs in the fall, egg taking on the little manistee weir. And I asked that same question of the fishery biologist. They're all DNR biologists there pretty much. And no, they don't go out of the way to catch. I asked them if they raise the gates in the fall, and they do sometimes. They'll raise the gates on the little manistee weir to keep lamprey from spawning. But that's all I know. Mike, I don't know any other. I would think other weirs probably raise it in the fall or in the spring when the waters are running cold, just to keep them from getting up in the headwaters. If you can keep them from getting in the headwaters, wow, that's a big success. But you can't leave those gates up forever because there's steelhead spawning, and so you got to let some things through naturally spawn too. So
Thank you.
Again, Alan, thank you this evening for your
Thank you.
presentation. It was very informative. And I wish everyone a good evening and stay safe.